Moskowitz for 5 minutes of questioning.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you for allowing me to wave on today. In a previous life, I was the State Emergency Management Director of Florida for Governor Ron DeSantis as the state coordinating officer, where an emergency is declared in Florida. Almost all of the governor's powers are also invested in the emergency management director, and all secretaries of all departments report to the state coordinating officer. So yes, it was a little awkward to have all these other Republican appointees having to listen to a Democrat. But I got that job because I was qualified. And I got to work with both Brock Long, who was the director, the administrator of FEMA during the Trump administration, and Pete Gaynor when I was there. I was there for the Category 5 Hurricane Michael recovery. I ran the Hurricane Irma public assistance reimbursement process, the Citrus Block Grant Program, the Timber Block Grant Program, and Florida's COVID response. And let me first say this, any day that we're talking about emergency management is a good day, because we are often overlooked and we are often underinvested in. No one cares about us during blue skies, but when gray skies hit, that's when we get all of the attention. During Hurricane Michael in the Panhandle, I was deeply concerned about fiscally constrained areas. This is a Republican area, and some of these towns had only $5 million city budgets. Their city budgets were $5 million a year, but they had $35 million of cost. Those cities would have failed. Those residents would have had to leave. Those towns would have not have been rebuilt. Actually, who helped save them? It was President Trump. President Trump helped save them, because what he did was he expedited the reimbursement to those towns, and he increased the reimbursement rate to 90%. And without that, these towns of the Panhandle would have absolutely never recovered. Another piece of disaster management that a lot of people don't know is a lot of it's done by the private sector. It's not done by government, right? The private sector does all sorts of functions, technical assistance, monitoring, logistics, debris removal, all done by the private sector. Mr. Smitherman, and thank you for your service, because I know what that job is like. You rely heavily on the private sector through vendors to go and complete a mission. It's not done by government. Mr. Kanuski, you talked about resiliency and mitigation. You're 100% right. It would be great if we could be more proactive with the disasters. But the problem is that a lot of people don't want to change the building code. A lot of people don't want to do these things. Why? Because it makes the cost of houses more expensive. After Hurricane Andrew, when we redid the building code in Florida, which, by the way, has saved us a lot of money in disasters, many people didn't want to do that because they said the cost of homes in Florida would go up. So sure, can we make homes more resilient to fire in California? We can. It's going to slow the rebuilding process. It's going to slow recovery. Can we elevate homes in Florida? We can. It's going to slow down the rebuilding process. So there is a give and take with all of that stuff. I want to talk about FEMA reimbursement. It's super critical, right? Mr. Smitherman, you would know this. Alabama could not have afforded the Tuscaloosa tornado on their own if there was no federal reimbursement. It's a $2.5 billion disaster. Oklahoma gets 68 tornadoes a year, okay? They cannot. Oklahoma and Alabama have, what, a $12, $15 billion budget, right? These aren't budgets like Texas or California or Florida or New York. A lot of these red states cannot afford a major disaster if there was no federal reimbursement. And so the idea of FEMA going away would dramatically hurt red states. Could you survive a Category 4 storm coming in from the Gulf of America without federal reimbursement? I know the answer. Your state would have to raise taxes. It would have to raid the education fund. It would have to raid DOT. And if it didn't do that, it would have to raid taxes. And people would say to me, well, Jared, how do the power companies do it? How can the power companies come in? How can they amass all these huge forces? It's very simple. They pass that cost off to the consumer. So when my power companies come in and spend $300 or $400 million getting the power up, and thank God they do, because getting power up is the most important thing after life, health, and safety in a disaster. How do they do it so quickly? Cost doesn't matter, because they push that cost off to the consumer in a surcharge. So listen, what do? How do we fix FEMA? First of all, I support the president's EO. I think the president coming out and forming a commission is the right idea. And let's put experts on there that know what they're doing. I have been proposing for years now to take FEMA out of Homeland. That is my bill, and I'm doing that with Byron Donalds of Florida in the House, and we got Tom Tillis coming out in the Senate. We'll be announcing that bill again. But I've been doing it for 2 years. Why? Homeland is a great agency. It is. But it's become too big. And FEMA cannot function there. For an agency that needs to be fast, it can't function in an agency of 22 others. And talking about them getting involved in immigration, they shouldn't be involved in immigration. But why are they? Because Homeland is using FEMA to run every grant of every agency all within Homeland. Half of FEMA's personnel now is running grants. They're not doing response. And so we got to get them out of that. The second thing we can do is we can block grant money down. We absolutely can do that. I did citrus block grant. Mr. Chairman, if you allow me just a couple.
Yield 45 seconds
Thank you,
because
sir.
balance the clock. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I did citrus block grants. I did timber block grants. We can block grant down the public assistance money. We can get FEMA out of the housing business. They're terrible at housing. We can block grant that down to local governments and to states to do that stuff. That would shrink the size of FEMA. It would. It would also allow FEMA to refocus on response. When we say response, FEMA doesn't have much. They coordinate other federal resources. In fact, that's what Mr. Smitherman does. He coordinates the other state resources that he has. And so EMAC is great, but we got to make sure they get the reimbursement. Police, fire, the National Guard. They're all great resources. They will not come and help from other states on EMAC if they don't get their reimbursement. And so I implore my colleagues, let's not politicize disaster aid. That will not help blue states or red states. You're going to be punishing your constituents, Americans, patriots, soldiers, first responders, police departments, fire departments. But we can fix FEMA. We can reform it. We can save it. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask unanimous consent to enter Republican applause for some of his comments to my Democrat colleague?
You got it.
Into the record.
The gentleman from Florida's time has expired.
Some of his comments.
I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we could ask the witnesses to respond to these in writing.